up to 3 more questions, depending on how quickly we get through. But thank you all for keeping so much to time. First question, can you say what you think the most pressing environmental issues are for this constituency, and what would you do in Parliament to tackle them and the global climate emergency? The order is Faisal, Ian, Paul, Sharma and Josh.
This is the most urgent issue. The climate crisis is the most urgent issue. Look, nationally, we have to push for us to meet targets and meet them before the Paris Agreement said, because actually there's a lot of low and middle income countries that have to develop a bit more and need a bit more room. So what do? We need to move very quickly to that 0 carbon target, and we need to do the renewable energy thing. I mean, it's actually a sort of blessing in disguise. It can create good jobs around the country for non-graduates, and it means that we can address inequality at the same time. This is the work I've been doing with the governments of Spain and Canada and Indonesia. It can happen, Germany's done it. It's definitely what I will be pushing for in government, and it's really important that that's publicly owned. Right? There's only 1 wind turbine in this country right now that is owned by the public. Why is the wind, the sun, and all of these things, they're not there to be made profit out of, they're all of ours, right? So something that we really need to push on, and this is where we need different voices in Parliament, is to push the Labour government that's going to be further on public ownership of these issues, of renewable energy. Locally, we have to be really careful and protect our environment. There are plans to build over bits of woodlands off Larkswood Avenue, for instance. There are issues with the Greenbelt. I know they're looking at the Greenbelt again. We absolutely need to protect our environment. We call it Woodford Green for a reason. And you know, for me, yes, we need new housing. It's maybe somewhere where the ideas and I agree, but we don't want that to be tower blocks, and we don't want that to be built over our green land. Thank you.
Number 1 locally is that ludicrous incinerator that sits pumping out its gas all over northwest Chingford. I have fought endlessly with many in the community here to try and get that originally shut down and certainly not made even bigger. We've got the real ludicrous problem of a council group made up of councillors from across the whole area who've actually decided to let that grow in size, and because they're growing it in size and because we're so much better now at collecting our stuff and disposing of it properly, we are getting trucks coming from all over London to keep it at capacity. That is utter madness. And I think that what they should do now is review that and work to shut it down. Even the owners of it said the other day when I saw them, we don't need that much capacity, but we're happy to build it. Well, I hope the councillors will look again at this for the health of those who live in North Chingford, because that's where the plume rises the whole time. Not a single MP in this area is in favour of it. The second thing I would say is that the government has made a huge investment into offshore wind. It's the biggest amount of offshore wind generation of any country in the world at the moment, and that is a good thing. But one thing is also bad. If you want to drive people away from this, imposing a ULEZ program here on Chingford and here, right now, when you know very well that the levels of pollution are at a sustainable level and you don't need ULEZ, that puts people off green agenda. If you want to have them on side, do sensible things that help their lives and not stupid things like generating that terrible incinerator.
The UK contributes 1% of the global pollution, which is nothing, absolutely nothing compared. In fact, the Tories have rolled back, saying the 2050 deadline for net zero is unachievable, which it is unachievable. It's putting up the costs of living for everybody. It's costing jobs. When we're sitting on oil and coal, which, while I know can be polluting, but the technology has moved on from the old furnaces and the old power stations. in the past. So we need to actually invest in future technology to get power, and not these wind farms that in 7 years are useless, that cost more to put up than what they actually achieve. Thank you.
Things are only unachievable if you accept they're unachievable, and we cannot have that principle when you're looking at the climate emergency. Environmental issues are extremely, extremely important, and we have to be working together to achieve what we need to do our targets in carbon zero. And in particular, and I've heard this from a lot of residents I've been speaking to, it's housing stock. We have some of the worst insulated housing stock in Europe in this country. There was a programme back under the last Labour government to look at insulation and solar power. That was cut by this Conservative government. We would actually reinstate working at how we can get better houses better insulated, and that's a double opportunity for people to have their energy bills reduced, but also have better insulation in their homes, so their homes are more energy efficient, and then won't have issues of damp and mould. That's one thing locally that I would actually be advocating for. But every council in London, every council that I know of, has actually declared a climate emergency. We are all responsible for some way about how we can tackle the climate emergency, whether it's small things like how we recycle better, or how we have larger things like planning reform, which I actually have a great understanding of, because that's what I've been doing for the past 8 years, about enabling communities to build solar farms as necessary. 63% of renewable projects that go through planning are rejected at the moment. That cannot happen. Planning is a massive obstruction to massive strategic need for tackling the climate emergency. So my role here would be twofold: supporting residents to make the small changes they can make, and to the two councils in Waltham Forest and Redbridge to how they can achieve their climate emergency targets. But nationally and strategically, using my expertise within planning to sort out the structural issues that we need to do to tackle the emergency.
Locally, I think one of the big issues facing us is the dumping that continues to go on into our waterways. Last year, the River Lee saw over 400 hours of continuous sewage pumped into it by Thames Water and other water companies. The Liberal Democrats don't think that's acceptable. Our number one priority when it comes to sewage will be to bring these companies back under control, rein this in. We're going to set tough targets on the water companies when it comes to ocean dumping. It has to be completely eliminated by 2030. We're going to put taxes on water company profits and ban their bonuses while they're not compliant. And we would eliminate Ofwat and replace it with a much stronger and much more capable agency that was able to actually properly implement these restrictions and hold these companies to account. When it comes to the environment more broadly on a national level, the Liberal Democrats have a very ambitious manifesto, much more ambitious than that of either Conservatives or Labour. We've set out targets of reaching 90% renewable power generation by 2030 and full net zero by 2045. That's 5 years ahead of our global obligations. We would also implement schemes to make houses cheaper to retrofit and renovate in order to eliminate some of those kind of insulation and inefficiency issues that Sharma was talking about. And we would also remove the Conservative restrictions on the development of new solar, wind and tidal projects.
Because this was an unfortunately very broad question, we wanted to give the chance to the audience, if they wanted to ask one supplementary question. Is there anybody who wants to put, there's a hand over there. Can we make sure we keep to the question, please, or the area of the question?
Well, let's go back to the national health and the public sector. The factor is, I don't want my taxes to go up, just to be wasted on the public sector, especially on the national health. I don't mind it going to the front line, for the doctors, the nurses, the cleaners.
I'm sorry.
I do object.
I'm sorry, this isn't the moment for that question. I've asked if there's a follow-up on the environmental issues. Lady behind, please.
I think we've all heard a lot about the water, and I thought that was an excellent point you made, thank you. I'm just wondering if you could say very clearly whether you would be in favour of renationalising water.
100%, yes. Has been of our, I mean, lots of our natural monopolies, but water in particular, how much water is lost every day, 1,000 Olympic-sized pools of water, how much of the Thames water has got in debt, they're taking the money out of the system even, and now they're saying they're going to increase our prices massively. Absolutely not. I would say as well, add on water, you know, IDS did vote for some of these provisions that allow these private companies to have sewage in our water, and it's quite important to point that out.
I don't have a principal agreement to blind-scale nationalisation because I'm old enough to remember when the nationalised industries utterly failed. So the reality is, if one of these water companies fails to meet its requirements and its targets, then the government can step in and should take it over and make sure it changes. However, right now we have an environment agency that's meant to be able to stop that. So my view is, not in principle, but the government has the power, if necessary, to step in and make it better. And by the way, when the nationalised industries ran this, sewage was going into the water in those days too.
I heard a statistic the other day that really scared me. 10,000 people were hospitalised for waterborne diseases under this Conservative government. And I wish I could stand here and tell you I would definitely nationalise water companies. But the reality is we've committed as Labour to renationalise our railway network. There's only so much we can do, and I am loath to pay any more money to the shareholders and to the people running these water companies. I want to fine them, I want to heavily regulate them, because actually that's how we get things done. We don't have the funding to nationalise them as we want to. And it's about priorities and choices when you're in government. What can you prioritise? And I'd rather not waste money on paying shareholders, but making sure that they are fined properly, and we put money where we can.
What Sharma said about priorities is correct. You have to put your money where it can do the most good. The Liberal Democrats don't have an explicit policy around renationalising the water supply, but yes, if elected to Lib Dem, I would support the renationalisation of water.
Actually, Reform is in favour of renationalising 50% all utilities services, 50% publicly owned and 50% owned, run by UK pension funds, so that your money stays within the UK and it helps, and you get professional advice on the business as well. So yes, and as to the pollution of water, as people have said previously in the past here, they should be held accountable to and fined terrible a lot.